Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Operational Reset Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Operational Reset coaching that I do. At the cornerstone of that coaching is ORSM, Operational Reset Stack Method, which we're going to dive into today with my guest, who is a doctor and author in the military, and it just has done some incredible work, and it's right alongside what I'm doing. And so I'm really, really excited to welcome my guest, Dr. Rob Carter. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And Joe, thanks a lot for all the work you do and the opportunity for us to really just have a conversation about the synergy of impacting ultimately, the humans and the populations we care a lot about. So again,
Yeah.
thanks for the invitation.
My pleasure. I mean, we connected. You reached out to me after the last podcast episode with Anthony from Heroic Industries, and something that he and I were talking about really resonated with you. And so I pop into my email, and there you are, and we got on a conversation. And boy, I'll tell you what, it was immediate connection and just back and forth and banter, and I really enjoyed it. And I said, well, we got to get Rob on the pod and have a conversation. And I know you got a new book coming up. I think in November you told me it's going to drop, and want to talk about that. But I really like there was such a interesting back and forth that we were having about ORSM, what I do, and then the work that you've done, and one of your other books called The Morning Mind, and I just want to dig into that. First, give the folks a little bit of a history, a little background. How'd you start with this work? Where did that come from, and where are you from?
Yes. So no, I really appreciate that. And so yeah, I appreciate it. The Morning Mind really gave birth from working with veterans populations. I volunteer for a non-for-profit with my wife called Project Welcome Home Troops, and Project Welcome Home Troops is really coincides with the work you do. It's about helping veterans reset after years of deployment, years of stress, and as we talked before, can negatively impact lives in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was invited to give a talk at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and it was about the title of the talk was Hacking the Wizard to Silence the Lizard, to really help shift away from the lizard brain to more of a higher order wizard. So really engaging the cortex and moving away from the spine level responses that we often have. So in that context, I talked about stress, cumulative stress, and the need, which is something that resonates with your work, and that is resetting that baseline, because we can deal with stress, but as we continue to build on it, trauma can ultimately break down our ability to actually respond in a favorable way and overload the nervous system. And we know that a dysregulated nervous system has many unhealthy acute and chronic consequences. So we published The Morning Mind, and it was a great book, great success, but
Yeah.
really getting after how do you start the morning off right? And so
Yeah.
we talk about the physiology of the first 30 minutes and how that can lead to a productive, fruitful day.
Mm-hmm. I think that's super critical. I mean, so many of us, I'm preaching to the choir here, oftentimes just wake up and we're right back into what we were either doing the night before or what we got to do, 90 minutes from now, or we're scrolling, or we're just filling the mind with, excess. What I try to do now is wake up, jump right into meditation, get meditation in, and then get into my work. Have some water, start, not the caffeine, because I used to be a coffee guy right away, and then I heard about, Dr. Andrew Huberman was talking about, wait 90 minutes because the adenosine will, release from the cells. You won't block them with the caffeine, and later on in the day, if that adenosine now is coming out, you get that midday drop. And so I've been over the years working on that, trying to like lock in the right morning routine. But talk a little bit about that 30 minutes, Rob. What is
Yes. So
what's ideal in that?
what's ideal, and I really appreciated your points about meditation, breathing. So one of the cornerstone techniques that we teach in Project Welcome Home Troops Power Breath workshop is breathing. And
Mm-hmm.
so really starting off the day, really easing into it, because what we what the evidence say, MRI data, just studies show that when you look at, if you go to sleep stressed and basically set you up for a successful night of sleep, you wake up with the same thoughts. And so, and then that then leads throughout the day. And so, what an ideal morning would look like is, first of all, waking up. If you have to wake up to an alarm, like many of us do to go to work and everything, try and select a tune that basically is not jarring, right? So, hard rock, really deep bass rap or whatever folks use, is probably, that's going to be jarring to the system. It's
Yeah.
going to elevate heart rate, cause an additional spike in cortisol, and just not good. It's going to put you in that reptilian mindset. So basically, going from sleep to wakefulness, and realistically over time, as you practice, you can really begin to train the body, train the mind to wake up. Many times I wake up 5-10 minutes before my alarm. So you
Mm-hmm.
can begin to reset the body. And that's part of, your work as well. So really waking up naturally as possible. And then, versus just jumping out of the bed, as you get older, you may have to run to the restroom. That's fine. But just waking up naturally, just, like a butterfly, just waking up, and then, doing meditation. It can be still while you're supine, but doing a body scan, just observing, from your foot up to your head, just observing, what's going on in your body. Observe what's going on in your mind. And then if you have the time, which I encourage over time, folks will be able to build this in, but just 5-10 minutes of meditation. For some folks, that may be meditating on a Bible verse, meditating on a mantra, whatever works for them. But then just really um, waking up the mind in a way that brings awareness. And so it's about transitioning, really having some awareness, and then really getting out of the bed and doing the things that you need to do, but really setting up a routine. Say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, where it becomes very natural and not stressful. Shower, facilities, whatever you need to do, gradually get into that. And
Mm-hmm.
then what I like to do as well, and I was stationed in Germany and met a naturopath, said, hey, just if you can not have coffee, which, after you begin to do this, you can really not immediately need caffeine. And again, that's part of going to sleep at a decent hour as well. But just a glass of 8 ounces, 6 ounces of warm water. Some people will put a small non-caffeinated tea bag in that, and then have that. And really, if you can do it, not have any food for about an hour, 90 minutes, really, just, and then maybe have something gentle, not a very heavy breakfast, some oatmeal. And then many people have to obviously drive to work, but then maybe once you get there, having maybe that oatmeal or whatever, but really easing into it. Also in that is not immediately grabbing your phone and checking emails. So and trying as much as possible having an electronic free morning. I know for a lot of people that sound like impossible, but you begin to recognize that if you plan for it, you can actually do it. And so it's really about, from whatever time you wake up, the first 3 hours, as much as possible, easing into it. And also, if you have the ability to plan meetings, don't plan your most stressful meetings first thing in the morning, 8, 9 o'clock. So the outcomes tend to be better, 11 in the afternoon if possible. So, do some work that requires um, concentration. So, that's a great time as well to think about things. And so,
Mhm.
again, that's ideal. I understand that all of those things may not be achievable for everybody every day, but if we don't actually set a baseline, if we don't set what is ideal, then
Right.
we will not have things to work towards. So,
You're
so
gonna
that's the idea.
Yeah, you're going to miss every target you don't set up. That's what I always
Exactly.
say is you got to set up the target. And then there's, in my coaching, I'm often talking about, and this came from coaching myself. This came from my development, um, disciplined flexibility. So disciplined in the routine, but if the routine has to shift, you have to have this flexibility to say, okay, I, didn't get this in, or I didn't get that in, or I had to wake up earlier, so my routine was a little bit off. It's okay. Let's not beat ourselves up about it. Let's understand that we can get to as close to, ideal as we want, but it's not always going to happen. And it's okay. The more that we have that goal set and the more that routine that we get into it, the better it's going to be. And to your point, the easier. What I heard you say a few times was, I heard you say in the beginning, we wake up with the same sort of the same thinking that we went to bed with, and then talking about going to bed at a decent time to be able to make sure that we can get up at the time that we want. So to me, when I hear that, I think, well, it's so critical. Then the morning routine is based on the nighttime routine. So if we have a messed up
Yes.
nighttime routine, or we're staying up super late, or we're going to bed super stressed, well, that's going to carry over. Talk a little bit about that too, because I think it's critical for people to hear that kind of got to back into it, work backwards from the ideal, and that starts the night before.
Yes. So again, you figure most people would try and get 6.5 to 8 hours of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Again, may not always be possible, but again, you should work towards that baseline. One of the things I did mention about the morning as well. So that transition from the bed to the facilities, maybe you have to go to facilities first, but then come back and a minute or two of stretching.
Mm-hmm.
Just it can be on the floor, it can be on the chest, it can just be something as rolling the wrist around, just doing some, just really waking up the spine, waking up the body. So that's something that you can include in as well. It doesn't have to be, a full exercise routine. Again, at night, the same things. At least 30 minutes to an hour, if at all possible. Go to bed, without electronics free. And even if you have to go to bed a little bit later, because you had to work a little bit, but actually the same idea, body scan, maybe a little bit of stretching, really preparing the body and the
Mm-hmm.
mind for sleep.
This is
And
Yeah, this is as we're building these routines, as we're thinking about this, this is also, I love this crossover, because that we talked about with ORSM, because you can, all of these stacks that I teach in the core series, there's 36 of them, and there are stacks that you could put within these routines of when you wake up, of when you're going to bed. They take 3 minutes or less. As you're stretching, you can be running a stack where you're lowering activation, and then you're removing the additional stress load that's being held in the body, and then you're reclaiming the internal control that you want. And so I love this idea of building out our routines. I say this a lot: run your day, don't let your day run you.
exactly. And another important aspect, which can be incredibly jarring to your circadian rhythms, alertness, and overall night sleep quality is light.
Mm,
So basically, if at all possible, really dimming the light. Some people begin to use things like red light, but really shifting from bright light to, again, it's really preparing yourself to get a good night's sleep. The same thing in the morning. You don't want to just like flip on every bright light, to in the house, because again, all of those is disruptive. If you think about many generations ago, before electricity, people went to bed when the sun went down and they woke up when the sunrise. So and during that period of time was our physiology and genetics, and genes are tied to that. So we have genetics that tie the body, and now we have a lot of artificial light, and we don't really recognize how disruptive that can be to our overall circadian rhythm. And if you
mhm,
ever been out camping or been out, in the woods where you kind of get back to that natural light routine, that's one of the reasons why when you go out in nature, and you're camping and everything, it feels refreshing.
mhm.
It's of course you may be removed from the day-to-day stress, but we sometimes underestimate the overstimulation that we actually add to the overall physiology. And again, I think that's where a lot of your work really help folks recognize getting back to that baseline, and ultimately having routines to exit or enter into situations. So it's just
It's
important
exactly,
to stack all of that stuff.
yeah, it's exactly what it's about. I talk about this when I'm teaching ORSM. I talk about this idea where we go from, you know, into a high pressure or high performance scenario where we have to be operating at our peak and it's stressful likely, and we have to get back to a baseline. We have to reset so that when we get to the next experience of high stress, high performance, we have all of our capacity. And that create and how we do that is creating flexibility in the nervous system. And so the more we adapt by using ORSM, the more we can train the nervous system to go from stressful experience to reset, stressful experience to reset. This is big in the military, and it's big in law enforcement and first response. These folks are going constantly, day to day, stress, reset, stress, reset. And many of them don't have the reset part of it. They're living up here in stress and they're just riding it out, stress to stress to stress, which is why I built this. Happened to me. I didn't understand that I was just idling in fight or flight all the time. And what ended up happening, we talked about it, is became an allostatic load, disconnection, impatience, irritability, health issues. All of these things were created by that. And it took me many years of after leaving law enforcement thinking, okay, if I leave the profession and I go do something that I'm gonna, that's not as stressful or not as impactful, then it's gonna be okay. It's just gonna magically change. And that wasn't the case. I
Yes.
needed to do the work. I needed to have a system to identify first and then adjust those things that had happened. And again, this is why I created ORSM as a way to not as a way to interrupt us getting to that place where we're so overwhelmed that we're completely burnt out with life and all that it has for us.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the common denominator, whether you're a police officer or an executive in the workplace or whatever profession, we have to work under and perform under some physiological load.
Yeah.
And that's going to feel different, to different people. So whether you're a clinician, first responder, shift worker, it's all about performing under that physiological load. And the reality is not, most cases, is not physical. It's the cognitive. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and what we continue to do is add to that cognitive overload
Mm-hmm.
by, which is what our new book is tied to, and that is convenience, right? And one of the things that is simple as, which can be difficult for people with a very busy schedule, and that is preparing a meal at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I just go back to my childhood in Louisiana, where you smell crawfish etouffee, or you smell apple pie, or just the overall process of preparing a meal, sitting down, eating the meal, without electronics and other distractions. And we undervalue how those innate physiological responses tied to routine that humans evolved. Humans did not have all these distractions, whether you were cooking the food or you were admiring the food being prepared from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
The overall smell, and even when people sell homes, right, they'll bake an apple pie because we undervalue the physiological cognitive response of
Mm-hmm.
something as simple as that. But now we are such in a get it, want it right now. We can appreciate maybe we're a little bit older of not having those, but the current generation is all about I need it right now, and we don't really appreciate the impact on the brain of that dopamine. It's just, I need Uber Eats, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. I need this, dopamine, dopamine, and so we are in a dopamine overload topped off with cognitive overload, always in cortisol. We're basically on the accelerator all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do things and build things into our life to back off the accelerator, we have sympathetic withdrawal, that's how we run into all these problems that we can't understand. And then lack of sleep, lack of nutrition, lack of hydration, all those things that are help us mitigate waste removal. And one of the things we talk about even in the morning mind is, each organ system go through a cleansing, process, endocrine, the skin, the brain, the heart, cardiovascular system, the lung. It's all going through a cleansing. It's actually tied to circadian rhythm.
Mm.
It doesn't work as well when you're constantly hitting the dopamine and the cortisol.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's where the work that you do, why I really admire it. It's really helping reset and helping people appreciate that. And I think tying that to the circadian rhythm, tying that back to what people are doing in between can really help enhance that overall process.
I think so many people are trying to escape, and that dopamine hit gives them a little escapism. It gives their mind something else to think about when I'm just watching, when I'm just scrolling or watching my YouTube show, or and I'm just seeing random things. I don't have to think about what I have going on, the stresses in my life, the cognitive cloud that's there in my head. And I think when we begin to, what I've seen and what I did with myself was when I began to regulate my nervous system more, and got it to a place where it wasn't foot on the gas, idling constantly, and I was able to activate parasympathetic and down regulate sympathetic, and that impulse control became greater. For me, I was able to say, all right, I'm not so inclined now to grab that quick Uber Eats or grab that quick fast food. I'm not inclined as much to grab that, cell phone and just start scrolling. I can enjoy a little bit more about what's around me and what's in me. And it's also what I see as the crossover here, where we have this you have this idea that your book is going to talk about this convenience factor and how it affects our lives. And the work that I do is really that system that can create flexibility and capacity in us so that we don't get trapped down this hole of convenience.
Yeah, yes, spot on. And convenience over time, there's definitely technology that enhance our lives.
Mm,
Whether, the advent of HVAC, television, all these things basically added value. We had more understanding of surroundings.
mhm.
We could basically avoid heat casualties from extreme weather patterns. And then we had cell phones, which allowed us to communicate, um, and all of those things add value. And it's not the technology; it's really the overuse of the technology where it's having a huge impact on our ability to have resilience and people interaction, all the things that basically are important to humans. And I think you just hit on a good point, and that's the avoidance. We are slowly migrating into avoidance, like, and you see that, where we have a, a loneliness crisis, despite the human, the planet has 4 or 5 times as many people populating the planet. There's more people, more loneliness. How can that exist? How can you have more people and more loneliness? And it's not that there's a shortage of people, there's an increased shortage of positive interactions. And,
Mm,
and, and you see that in societies where there's generally more happiness, there's more interactions. Where you see more depression, more loneliness is when people basically don't interact with people. And this is a positive interaction. So we're using technology. I didn't have to fly to your location. We didn't have to like co-locate, but you can have a positive interaction even virtually,
yeah.
which the technology has afforded us to do that. But that doesn't happen. You see people at dinner, 4 family members, and everybody strolling, eating at the same time. That's an in-person, unhealthy, not positive interaction. So think about it, 1 hour of having a conversation. We actually wrote another book, actually, called A Heart and Soul of Food, which is all about culture. It was in between the one and mine, our current book, but it really talks about the culture around basically how cultures evolved around food and how many lessons and everything were passed down from generations, and how food actually played a part in the preservation of history, the preservation of knowledge and information passed through generations. But that's something that we've lost control over as well.
Talk about this. What's the name of the newest book that's coming out, and talk a little bit about where this idea first percolated up, and you started to get excited about sharing this and how that process was for you.
Yeah, yeah, yep. So great point. So the new book that we're publishing is called The Convenience Trap, and that book really gave birth over time. I began to think about this probably a decade ago. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and we, as a family, we do martial arts, and we were looking for a dojo, and there was one that was really close, very convenient, and we said, okay, let's try and find, regardless of the convenience of going, just a few blocks down the street. But let's find the one that's right for the family. So we looked around. We spent about a month or so. We visited some, and then that was really, I was like, yeah, it's convenient, but let's find the right one. And then I definitely, just looking through the lens, and this is where, being a little bit older, but actually having a younger kid, in contrasting convenience that I experienced as a kid and some of the strategic inconvenience that was just naturally not there because we didn't have a lot of the current technologies. And so, and then just watching how, when, for example, kids respond when parents take away technology, or our parents are the technology of there's a power failure, or something like that. One of the things that really brought this to forefront, we were living in Austin, Texas, during the Snowmageddon, and basically so many people. Austin is a technology city, had a lot of electric cars, a lot of electric everything, really smart homes, right? And then in a place where you may lose power for a little bit, but you don't lose power for days. And so the snowstorm, we 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 were victims to it. I mean, I could not get the car out of the garage because basically I needed power to
Mm.
actually open the garage, and because I had never used the emergency, the red
Yeah.
card, it was stuck, and
Oh, wow.
so I ended up breaking the mechanism trying to open the garage. So now we have a car that's actually stuck in the garage, and through that experience, I realized that we had plenty of water, now frozen water, because it was so cold in the house, that we basically had become victims to just convenience. Because normally when you have some type of emergency disruption, there's always an exit ramp. But now we're in a situation where we have somewhat prepared, but we have not really prepared. And I remember, just not actually. So fortunately we still had a phone, but by this point we didn't have power. So I wanted to actually call my dad in Houston to check on him. Believe it or not, I couldn't remember his phone number,
Right.
because I become it was so convenient just to do voice or search in the phone for the number. I realized, wow, I can't remember 5 numbers. And I remember as a kid, you knew everybody's number, with the old, with dial-up system, analog rotary. And through this process, I started, because I didn't have electronic, I started journaling, like, okay,
Mm.
how do we get ourselves in this situation? What have we lost? And again, how can I prepare for this not happening again? So 2021 really was the birth of the convenience trap, because we were in a situation where we were fundamentally trapped. Despite all the conveniences, all the technology,
Wow.
we were us and millions of Texans were in a situation that we didn't plan for. But
Right.
I remember we had some old neighbors down the road, wood burning fireplace, one of the older homes in the neighborhood, and they were well prepared. In fact, they were helping out folks that were not prepared, and we were not prepared, but they were definitely folks in worse condition than us. But that was really the birth of it, and really beginning to observe, how also there was not only just that aspect preparing, but just looking around how friends, family, colleagues, health, and overall life structure had really begun to decline as a result of convenience. And so again, it's not a hey, an attack on technology, but it's, again,
Right.
how do you leverage the technology? And so we talk about now strategic inconvenience, right? So the inconvenience of knowing 10 numbers, the inconvenience of thinking about what might happen, if you don't have the technology, the inconvenience of, okay, what about if my phone die and I can't read a map, or I haven't thought about the direction that I'm headed, and now I'm stuck,
Right.
right? So, and this happens every day, where folks are completely lost. They don't even know their own city well enough to stop and ask for directions. What they'll stop and ask for is, do you have a USB charger so I can charge my phone so I can get home, right? Yeah, so that's what it's all about.
I've seen it where people, the one road that they're that they go down all the time, they're doing some maintenance on it, so it's blocked. Well, they're just locked up. Like they can't figure out like, all right, go around the block, go one block down or two blocks down because this one runs this way, this one runs this way, and figure out a new path. They're so locked into that one path, that convenience of that path. It gets me from point A to point B every time. I don't got to think about it. And then one day, there's some orange cones out there, and it locks them up. They're stopped in the middle of the road, just like a lost puppy. You know, it's
Yes.
such an interesting concept, like that. What do you? I like this idea of what did you just call it? You called it the remedy to it is strategic inconvenience.
Inconvenience.
Talk a
Exactly.
little bit about that. Like, what are some of the things that people can do? You mentioned memorizing some phone numbers, you know, understanding your routes. But what are some of these other things that people can do that are strategic inconveniences that can help with this?
Yes. So just for example, a strategic inconvenience, we know that most Americans don't get enough steps in a
Mm,
day to day. We know that basically it may not be convenient for you to go to gym, but for example, parking a little bit farther away. How often do you see people in the parking lot just circling? Right? It's not that they're in a wheelchair or handicapped because there's of handicap spots, but they're literally in a rage. And I've seen people basically get out and almost have a fist fight because somebody took a parking spot. But you look down the road and just 10 cars, there's another parking spot. Strategic inconvenience would be, you know what, I'm going to take that parking spot, 10 or 15 cars away, park a little bit in the parking lot, get some steps in. That's the strategic inconvenience. First of all, you're not stressed out. Let me squeeze, fight over the first row of parking. That's strategic inconvenience. Doesn't cost you anything. Get a few more steps. You're not raising your cortisol.
yeah,
It's going to take the edge off, and you may actually notice some things,
yeah,
along that path.
yeah,
Another strategic, and that's from a physical perspective. Taking the stairs. Just small things people can actually do because we know that motion is tied to a healthy body is tied to a healthy mind. That's why, just small walks. So from a physical perspective, as I mentioned before, um, driving, just, basically taking a route without the GPS. I know people that use their GPS, and I got it. People use it for traffic, a wide variety of things, but there are a lot of times when you don't necessarily have to have it. Funny story, one of my neighbors back in Texas was his daughter got in a car accident at a four-way stop sign. She was using her Google Maps, Waze, whatever she was using, and there was a stop sign that had been placed in this new neighborhood, recently developed, but the stop sign didn't appear on the actual app. So she was so used to, 500 feet, stop at the stop sign. It didn't say it, so she didn't
oh
stop.
wow,
Blew right through it. And she told her dad, well, the phone didn't say there was a stop sign there. I saw it, but the phone
wow.
didn't say it, right? Strategic inconvenience, right? Do you listen to the technology? If you know that there's a stop sign, or that there's a dead end, right? Just because the phone or the technology is not telling you, right? The other things, right? Just like I said, if you have an opportunity to actually cook, because again, I actually lived with one of my professors in grad school. Never cooked the meal. I think I was the first person to use his stove because he was, takeout guy. Use the microwave and everything, and again, the value of basically cooking a meal without YouTube, just working through it. It may not work out well the first time, but that has a huge cognitive benefit. Being able to do something for yourself. how often do you try something new and you're so proud? Kids, right? The first time they can do even something simple as get on the potty, and I mean, that's part of us basically. The benefit, there's a huge cognitive to being able to do something that you haven't either done in a long time. That's the strategic inconvenience.
Yeah.
There's a reward to it. So basically, what I like to talk about, strategic inconvenience can equal a positive, rewarding experience. We often think about convenience as being more rewarding, but if you start doing just small things, and actually on our website for the book, we actually have folks take a resilience basically to see how much they've lost,
Mm.
due to due to over reliance on convenience, and you get a score, and it's shocking. But then we actually, in the book and in the website, we walk folks through how to, without a lot of effort, build back some strategic inconvenience and improve their resilience. And I'll tell you, the feedback we've gotten, which is one of the reasons why I decided to move forward with this book, is just the overall, the overall positive responses. Folks are like, "Wow, I'm getting my life back,"
Hmm.
and I think that's just an important aspect of it.
It's super important. I mean, I think that validation that you're creating for yourself. I talk about this a lot. Stop seeking validation outside of yourself. Create the validation from within. It's about ownership. And that idea of driving up to an intersection, seeing the stop sign, but the phone didn't tell me that there was a stop sign there. I'm looking at it. Like,
Exactly.
where's the ownership? There's ownership
Yes.
being lost in this too, of I have ownership and agency and capacity over my own movement, my own life, and we're losing that as well when we just rely on, okay, if the phone didn't say it, it's not there. What do you mean? Like, what reality are we living in here? It's super
Yes.
interesting. I think like what's fascinating about this too is what you talked about earlier, and this is the crossover between ORSM and what I do, and this idea of this convenience trap, because people need to build more capacity. They need to build more that resiliency. And there's two sides of that I see, that I talk about, and it's the capacity that we're talking about, but then it's the flexibility also. Flexibility in the nervous system creates this resilient capacity. And the more you can be flexible in shifting states, like we talked about, the more capacity you will have for these moments that are stressful and impactful for you, and more ability to have the foresight and the ability to think through some of these decisions that we're making. And so talk about it from your perspective, where you see, you've looked at my system a little bit, and where do you see the crossover in what the work that you do, and the ideas that you're putting out in ORSM as a system that can build this resilient capacity?
Yeah, no, and I'll reiterate one point you made. You said, yeah, you saw the stop sign, okay, but where was the awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a difference, right, in seeing and having the awareness to process. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that's where, I really appreciate your work. And this, tiered protocol is intentional.
Yes.
Micro reset, strategic inconvenience. As we talked about, you have to put in the work,
Yeah.
right? You got to take the time, which is inconvenience. A lot of times, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, your clients, the people you train, they say, I don't have time to do this. And I always say, you don't have the time not to do this, right? And again, just a physiological sigh, actually having the awareness of just something as you're inhaling and exhaling, you know, tied to your system. That's an inconvenience, but it's a strategic inconvenience, something that people can do, a sentence of intent, right? And then having recovery between tasks is, it feels inconvenient, but the reality is that the next task that you have to take, you're better prepared for it. You know, you've lowered your allostatic load and you're better prepared for it. So I think those are just some of the ways I think that the things that we've done both in our current book and in the past, really tying together what does that look like, you know, from a perspective of blocking and tackling and basically having some daily default,
Mhm.
right? And I think the daily default piece is tied to that strategic inconvenience. Is really all about basically how at the end of the day, you're better prepared for your next night, you're better prepared for your next day. Over time, you're better prepared for a more fruitful life.
Yeah, this is great. I know you talked about the and this I built this intentionally this way, right? The stress response hits us in layers. And so instead of just throwing, you know, a random wellness tool or a random technique at this, we're addressing it in layers as it arises with intentionality. And you know, you had talked about, you know, looking at that stack based system, this is why I call this it's a human performance system, not a wellness tool. And it's a human
Exactly.
performance system because it addresses the stress response in those layers. It addresses them as they arise, and um, it is about affecting that experience in real time, not when I'm going to retire, not when I'm going to have my next days off, not when I can go on that vacation, but no, right now, operationally, how do we get it done immediately in this time? But talk about that. Yeah, you know, you had told me that you liked this idea of the stack based system, and what stood out to you in that, and why did you find that unique and useful?
Yeah, I think you have a very unique, as you talked about, framework architecture that first of all people can recognize and relate to, because yeah, of course there's times when we go 0 to 100, but even going 0 to 100 we shift gears. So I think your system, from a physiological perspective, cognitive perspective, what you're really doing is allowing folks, even if they go to 0 to 100, they're able to basically say, okay, I'm in first gear, I'm in second gear, I'm in third gear, I'm grinding gears, I'm skipping gears. And I think that that is really important. And the benefit is that is the framework basically addresses the immediate problem that they're dealing with and has a tailored approach. And again, after we talked last time, I really dug into your system. I said, wow, this is really good. This is truly a human performance enhancing system. And what immediately came to mind is that a consequence, a benefit of it is truly awareness, because you can't unrecognize what you recognize. And so the more that this become part of their physiology, it's going to improve the overall optimization of their physiology and their human performance and their performance cognitively, physically. And what I really like as well is that it's an integrated approach, right? You know, like you can say some people, you know, which I enjoy exercise, I exercise, you know, every day, you know, like going out for a run, you know, is has a lot of benefit physically and cognitively. But there are scenarios where you can't run. You know, you have to basically, in your own internal milieu, have a process to lower the allostatic load and basically adjust. So I think that is the critical piece. You know, as you pointed out, it's not a wellness tool, again, wellness tools have their place, but
Yes.
ultimately, again, being able to come off the ledge and actually have, okay, in process, be in the present moment. That's what I really like about it. Which ties back to your meditation routine. It's basically it's merging the meditative mind at in the present moment, and then being able to follow a process that lowers that response and allows you to have a better outcome. I think it's
Yeah.
really tied, and that's something that all the work that we've done over the years is being present and being able to have a better outcome. And again, that's why I don't know why every human, right, would not want to do a system such as yours, because I don't know any human that don't want to be better. Okay, cognitively and physically, that where they struggle is the time. But as I mentioned before, they have to take the time if they want to be better. And that's just an interesting thing, because we're very much a society also convenient, is instead of actually doing something about it, we go to the doctor and add up another medication, or we don't even follow through with physical therapy, right?
Right.
We just want a quick fix that has consequences over time.
Yeah. And this is what I was thinking about this when I built the system, because so many of the people that I work with, so many of us in our lives, we're time restrained, or we at least feel that we're time restrained. And so that strategic inconvenience can be the what I call the action in isolation that one has to do is feels more difficult. Okay, well, what's the lowest barrier of entry that I can make this system? And that's every stack is built under 3 minutes. It can be done in under 3 minutes. And so so many of them can be done in 30 seconds to a minute, and increase your situational awareness, as opposed to
Yes.
where a breathing technique or a longer meditation session or even a workout pulls you away from the situation or the observation that you're making. And here's another big one, and I would love your feedback on this. Is look, I've been active all my life, and I absolutely encourage people to be active, work out, get that run in. But what we now know is that is also a load that you're putting on your body. You're intentionally, with intention, putting yourself in fight or flight towards that dumbbell, towards that mile. And you can add to the load that you're carrying if you don't have a system to reset. So what I teach is we prime before the workout, right? To remove any load that we have. So we're better in the workout. We can maybe hit a PR. We can do better, be more effective. And then after, we also reset. And so we're priming for it. We're intentionally, putting ourselves in a stressful situation, and then we're resetting from it after we leave, so that we can have the best recovery as well. This is the high performance that we can get with a system like this, if we're intentional and we understand. We take the knowledge and then we apply it to the action, with intention. And I'm so happy that that what came out in your observation of this is the awareness, because
100%.
as we create more flexibility in the systems and the state switching, it opens up our working memory. It allows us to have that awareness. And I just had a coaching call with my clients, and we talked about pattern recognition across zones of our day. And so we were looking at 4 different zones and creating awareness around those with regulation, and then identifying where we could make one small tweak that's going to have big impact, whether that's in the
Yeah.
morning, midday, transition to home, or evening time. And it all starts with regulation and awareness. So super excited that came out to you.
Yes, and I'll tell you the thing that like specifically with your system is a lot of times like programs will have knowledge. And again, knowledge don't change behavior, architecture change behavior, right? And a good point is that you don't have to like change everything. And I'm glad you raised that point. That's something we talk about all the time. Whether it's the morning routine, the night routine, the strategic inconvenience, you do it one thing at a time
Mm-hmm.
and build on it. And once you basically make that part of your routine, add something. And I think that goes back to your stacking concept. It's and I like the concept because it's truly building on,
Mm-hmm.
and it's helping optimize that human performance piece.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's one thing, and some people can maybe have capacity to add multiple things, but I always tell people, change the thing that basically is not sitting well with you, the thing that's causing you stress, anxiety, the thing that basically you go to bed waking up stressed about and you wake up in the morning stressed about. Focus on that thing, and
Yeah.
then now you begin to unpack the overall challenges that you might be experiencing, but you got to go after that. And then like that's why sometimes talk therapy, right? You go and you sit and you talk to somebody about it, but if you're not actually employing the architecture to change the behavior, you're going to become very smart about the problem, right? But
Yeah.
there's no solution.
Right. And this is what look, I would never tell anybody, I'm not a therapist, so I would never tell anybody to not go to a therapist. Talk therapy can be very therapeutic. It can be very good. But again, many of my clients have found that they need an integrated approach. They need that
Exactly.
talk time, but they need the action time, and they need the system that they can apply the action to, and they work well together. Again, integrate.
100%.
So don't stop working out. Don't stop going to therapy, but also take those things that are improving you and apply action to them. And
100%.
the power is in the action. And if you're not getting results from the thing that you're doing, well, we have to look at a different thing. We
Exactly.
doing the same thing, expecting different results is insanity. And so, yeah, I appreciate the feedback. And, we had talked really, what's interesting too is the idea that we talked about building data around this and data around the system. And so many people have wearables, even their phone becomes somewhat of a wearable, and because it's tracking certain things. But if you have a Whoop, or if you have any of these other, an Aura Ring, or any of these other things that can track, it's super fascinating to look at that data and see. It helps with the zone adjustments, because you can see, midday at 11:30, there's always a spike in my heart rate. What's going on there? Oh, that's when I have my weekly one-on-one with my manager. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I know that I need to prime for that now, come into it with more resiliency, more flexibility, and then likely reset from it after I'm done. But that data can create such a good awareness tool.
Yeah. And again, that's where like technology, if used appropriately, can help make you better. And
Yeah.
and, and you just hit on it. And the wearable industry is continuing to really, push the limits of what is possible. And a lot of the systems are very effective
Mm.
at being able to, is it an absolute? Some people get fixed around, well, it's not, the heart rate is not as reliable, but it's the trends, right? It's significantly better than not having any objective data. And so I always tell folks, hey, just, take a look at the trends, in your wearables, and do you notice, okay, am I in that high heart rate over sympathetic zone in the afternoon? Okay, maybe it's, I'm skipping lunch. That's adding to the stress, and just having awareness of what's going on in your body. And I think that's where the wearables. And I think as we talked about it in your line of work, that is a great segue, because sometimes people will, well, how do I know if this is really working? What data? And so I think that there's some great opportunities as well, and some of the longer trends as well. Like personally, before I really, it was kind of my wife really, after we met and got married, I really began to focus a lot on my own cognitive load, allosteric load, and just really some of the consequences. I was basically pre-hypertensive,
Mm.
which is a consequence of stress. Cortisol, was high. Cholesterol was trending in the wrong direction, and I was having a lot of GI. I was kind of diagnosed with possibly Crohn's, and so this is all related to stress. I was
Mm.
developing, symptoms and stuff that that is not good for long term, and that's sometimes people will wait till their body break down, and that's the benefit of this as well, is the immediate human, um, optimizing human performance, but then also the consequence of not just longevity, but really having a life that you really enjoy and having a high quality of life. And one of the things you touched on was, as you mentioned before, some people think that, hey, I can just run, I can just do one thing, or I can just do, but I think, as you pointed out, a functional protocol that integrates all the things that are going to be beneficial for you. Obviously, physical activity is great for weight management and overall metabolic balance, but balancing that with things that you're doing for your mind, because again, there are folks that definitely exercise and don't do anything for their mind. Cortisol is high. It affects their metabolic balance. So they may be getting the 10,000 steps, but maybe not seeing the body composition of weight loss that they would like to see. But
Right.
they haven't done anything to actually address, above the neck, that they're
Yeah.
operating from the neck down. And I think that's where that overall reset basically plays into it. It's a holistic approach to awareness. And again, you know, really stacking all those aspects together,
Mhm.
to provide a true operational signal that you are having a true biological reset. And you actually see that, in some conditions, with specifically around endocrine disruption, things like hypothyroidism, and sometimes folks will develop clinical conditions, but in many cases those can be reset. Like I said, I'm a living example of
Mm.
where, I was my body was responding as I had Crohn's, and I've been able, like I said, through management, um, non-pharmacological management, I've been able to manage, and I think a lot of it's tied to, like I said, not just having the knowledge of, okay, this is what stress does, but basically, um, doing something about it. And so,
You could just say
yeah,
it's the action that you're doing, it's the ownership that you're taking in this. And here's what I see a lot, and this is a big point that I've just began to start talking about more in my content and talking more with people about, specifically in first response. You have this idea that, the department, the agency, right? The people that we work for, they provide me with my uniform, they provide me with my gun, they provide me with my yearly training, they provide me with EAP, they provide me with this or that. Well, if it's not provided by them, then I can't do it. And or I expect them to do it. They didn't give me this time to work out. They didn't give me this or that. Where's your ownership? Where is your
yeah,
ownership in the fact that you can take control? You can take agency over it. And don't let your agency or department be the gatekeeper to your wellness, to you living a
exactly,
meaningful life. And this is what I run against is a lot of, this historic thinking and this idea that, well, if they are not going to do it for me, I can't do it for myself. No, no, no.
exactly,
Don't let them be the gatekeeper to your life that you want to live, and take ownership of it. Invest in yourself. Do the action. Seek out the knowledge. get the coaching, do that for yourself so that you can show up and be proud of the person you're looking in the mirror at. So, and I don't know if you found that maybe in the military as well, that sort of mentality that again, it's so much in my coaching. We try to shift that. It's about ownership. And so it's just something that I've begun to see more and more of. And I so want to encourage people to take ownership of their own lives. Just like
Yes,
that
yes,
girl, just like that girl seeing the stop sign, but the ownership wasn't there. She was just waiting for the phone to tell her what to do. No, no, no.
yes.
This is on a bigger scale where we have to take control of ourselves. And so many of them they're complaining about the departments that they're with as well. So you expect the department that you're complaining about to give you this agency, or to give you the opportunity. No, don't wait for them to give it to you. Go out and take it for yourself. Do the action. Take the action. So
Yes. No, you summarized that very well. It's and over time, and again, sometimes it's easy to look say, well, this generation, like our parents' generation, but there's definitely trends toward less ownership.
mhm.
And I think that is such an important aspect in society, and obviously every occupation, um, they all originate from the population. The people that take on those roles originate from the population at large. And I would say, just in general, we have an ownership problem,
Mhm.
and we have an ownership epidemic. And I think, but how we change that is one person at a time, taking ownership. Because what happens is that when one person is taking ownership, you see a trend. More people are taking ownership. So I like being around people that want to take ownership. Or if nobody's taking ownership, I'll take ownership. And people will get behind ownership, whether, like you said, whether that's in a department or, wherever, right? People will actually contribute. Sometimes it takes that one person. So if folks that's listening right now, if you're that person, take ownership, because people will get behind you, and and also people will see change in people. And that's one of the best ways you can help yourself and help people around you, is they say, hey, what are you doing? We noticed you've changed. You're not going 0 to 100 and responding. You seem a little bit happier, you seem a little bit more content. What are you doing? And I think sharing, right, what you're doing is important, and not just keeping it to yourself, but really sharing, and that can make a big difference, in somebody's life, and can impact their life holistically in many ways, and
Yeah.
maybe even prevent a death in many ways.
I talk exactly about that in the workshop, in my coaching. It's why the coaching is built around regulation first. It's about awareness and having a plan second, and it's about camaraderie and connection third, accountability and that ownership, so that you can have the capacity to take that leadership role. Where your 2 feet stand, you can lead, because leadership is an action. It's not a rank. It's not a title. It is a set of actions that one can do. And we talk about the ripple effect also. There is a negative ripple effect of just complaining and lack of ownership and not doing anything about your own experience. Well, there's also the reverse of that. The other side of the coin is there is a ripple effect of positivity that can move out, of influence, right, of action that creates influence, that creates a different environment, one where other people are also taking ownership and action. So tell me this, Rob. What's the next steps for the book? When does it drop? And how can people get a hold of you, learn more about what you're doing, if they're interested?
Yes, no, I really appreciate that. So the convenience trap is scheduled to drop November 17th. Is available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or wide variety of places. We have a website. It's theconveniencetrap.com, and you can learn more about the work that we're doing. There's also a place where you can reach out to us as well. So, and also, if you have any questions, we definitely address questions there as well. Yep. So it's we're super excited about the book, and just really super excited about being able to help people make a difference in their lives and in their communities, and just the people they really care about. But yeah, and also on, I mentioned before, we have an assessment where folks can go on and take the assessment. I think a lot of times it's like knowledge that help establish. Oh wow, you can't ignore the data,
Right.
right? And especially if you're honest with yourself. So they can like I said, on theconveniencetrap.com, they can actually go on and actually take the assessment, and that's where the process begins.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to take the assessment today. I'm on the website, The Convenience Trap: How to Regain Control in the World of Instant Gratification, by Dr. Carter and Dr. Carter. You and your wife,
Yeah.
amazing. And looks like there's a lot of great information on there. Scheduled to drop November 17th, just in time for Thanksgiving, a nice Thanksgiving read,
Yes.
and start taking those actions in isolation, build the knowledge, apply that knowledge to your action, and watch your life change in a meaningful way. And Dr. Carter, I appreciate you, man. It's been
Thank
great
you.
talking with you, and I know it's not going to be the last time we talk. And looking
No,
forward
for sure.
to continued conversation and our work crossing over for sure.
Yep. Yep. Definitely look forward to collaborating and having some more conversations.
Amazing. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you can, please share this. It means the world to me. Gets this work out to more people, and share it with a first responder, share it with a friend, share it with somebody you know is experiencing some stress in their life. And if you're interested in taking the action, having a conversation, you're not any more willing to wait for your department or your job or your family to step up and do something for you, but you're ready to step up and do the work yourself. Reach out to me, get in touch with me, Joe at joeswansontactical.com. You can reach out on Instagram at Joe Swanson Tactical. Let's have a conversation and see if the operational reset coaching is the right fit for you. With that said, enjoy your ride now. Stay sharp, everybody.